So I tested TBC Hardcore, and it went exactly how you'd expect. Hey everyone, Mavzerick here. I'm a WoW enthusiast and have played the game that we all know and love for about 20 years from a wide variety of difficulties. From classic to retail, I've always been a competitor and enjoy high-end Mythic Plus, Mythic Rating, and classic hardcore content. This past month, I joined up with our fearless leader, C-Dank, to tease out what can kill you in Outland in the hardcore setting. So let's get into it.
I'm activating challenge mode right now.
If you're like me and you like to see those big damage numbers fly on details but want to survive on hardcore, then this is the video for you. I hope it serves you well as a guide and scouting report for what's to come as we move closer to the Dark Portal opening on the WoW Classic Anniversary servers. Yeah, that's why you're second on the damage meter. Woo! Okay, sorry. As you watch this video, just note that all the recommendations I make are based off the average player. I may be practiced in heroic dungeons, but by no means am I on the same level as WoW veterans with skill level like Zaryu, Zico, and Peekaboo. In that order, of course. That being said, everything that I talk about for TBC Hardcore comes from the melee DPS enhancement shaman perspective. As we know, and some particular hunters like to point out, nothing in TBC can kill you as long as you play a ranged class. Well, in the wonderful world of melee, I'm here to say watch out. Since rating was only sparsely available on the PTR, I'm not going to focus on that content as much, but instead, I will take a deep dive into what some consider as objectively harder content during the initial release: heroic dungeons. In this video, we are going to talk about stats in the melee classes, and the heroic dungeons themselves. In melee DPS, we have 4 classes: Rogue, Warrior, Shaman, and Paladin. I'm not going to rank them because each of them have their own niche uses, other than to say Shaman is clearly the best, of course. When you're looking at the classes, Shamans have really great utility when it comes to totems, bloodlust, wind fury, buffing your groups, things like that. But rogues, however, have a lot of high survivability, where they're doing a lot of high DPS, they have a lot of CC between saps, cheap shots, blinds. Warriors, a little bit less so, but they do have their shouts, which can help buff the group in different ways. And then Paladin, of course, having the ability to heal, all of their different buffs, as well as a couple different immunities, which can help make mechanics a little bit easier. When looking at stats and builds, one of the most important things that you'll need to do is to optimize your build to have enough stamina in heroic dungeons. So ideally, you're going to want to balance out what type of damage stats you have, like critical strike, hit, attack power, with stamina gear to ensure that you have the proper amount of stamina. This is absolutely mandatory. If you do not have at least 9k or 10k HP to be very safe, while buffed, that being getting Commanding Shout or Prayer of Fortitude, you shouldn't even consider stepping into a heroic dungeon. Why do I say this? Because I got one shot. Again, and again, and again. Stamina is critical, as there are so many mobs in these dungeons that deal AoE that you will take damage from, or if not positioned appropriately, you will die from. Abilities like Thunderclaps, Cleaves, Whirlwinds, Fixates, charges, then meleeing the closest target despite threat, casted ground AoE abilities, and, the most deadly, sweeping strikes. I'm a guy who doesn't like to overuse add-ons, and I try to have the minimal amount of add-ons necessary to survive, so that my screen is pretty clean and I can see what's going on and enjoy the game. That being said, there are some must-have add-ons for heroic dungeons. Details, which includes a threat meter, some type of threat plates, or if you like to use the threat meter specifically, any type of add-ons if you want to be tracking your kicks or using nameplates to ensure that you're kicking mobs, and then any other typical weak auras or DBMs that you like to use. More specifically, when you're looking at details and looking at your damage or looking at your threat, it is so important that you keep track of your threat, because if you don't, you're gonna die. Are you one of those impatient melee DPS guys who, right when the tank pulls, you're ready to pop in there with your first melee hits and just start wheeling and dealing in your rotation? Well, you're gonna have to wait at least 3 seconds until you start your rotation, because if your tank gets some type of dodge, parry, miss, stun or taunt resist, you're dead. And for the most part, if your tank doesn't pick up that threat with his initial abilities right away, you're going to die getting one shot to a mob in a heroic dungeon. Nope. Dead. Aside from add-ons, there are also so many items that get introduced into the game during TBC. So I won't go over every single item in detail, but I just want to highlight a couple key things to consider. First and foremost, you are absolutely going to need to become friends with your local alchemist, because elemental protection potions are a must in certain heroic dungeons, particularly shadow protection and fire protection potions. There are a couple of bosses and certain fights where the abilities of these mobs do such high damage that it can be overwhelming for your healer, and so pre-potting before certain boss fights will guarantee your success. In addition to elemental protection potions, there are also iron shield potions, which help with the physical damage that is dealt by certain mobs, and those will also be necessary. Some other key items that we like to look at come from your professions. These can look like things as leatherworking has drums, which have high benefits to the entire party. Engineering utility items, this is particularly useful for tanks when they're trying to pick up threat on packs. And lastly, there are jewel crafting necklaces that can help absorb damage during an encounter. Well, that's it for items and builds, so let's get into the dungeons themselves. Heroic Dungeons, a place where you can vibe out with your 4 buddies and farm badges of justice and get some pretty sick loot. But it's not all fun and games. After testing this for a month, I can definitively say that I have died over and over and over. If you do not come prepared to TBC Hardcore as a melee DPS, you might as well build a house in your favorite leveling zone, because you're going to live there. If this is your first time playing Burning Crusade, especially on Hardcore, I would highly recommend watching more videos about each dungeon, because there are specific mob mechanics and boss fights that can just one-shot you if you're too close to the mob or aren't able to move out of mechanics quickly enough. Hey guys, this is our Heroic Burning Crusade Hardcore Dungeon tier list. This is going to be from the melee DPS perspective and also based off of your average group and not a min-max completely optimized group per dungeon. As we go into some of these dungeons, you'll note that some of the content in each heroic dungeon can be trivialized by other classes, kind of like when Shadow Priests mind control certain mobs in, say, Botanica or Shattered Halls or Burning Blood Furnace. But we're really going to just go over the averages. And yeah, so let's get into it. Let's see what we have first here. First up, we got Alkani Crypts. Now, Alkani Crypts, pretty short dungeon, 2 boss dungeon. There are a couple things that you got to watch out for as melee DPS. There is a bridge in the dungeon that can knock people off, which can be kind of dangerous if you don't know that it's there. And other than that, the mobs aren't hitting too hard, but you do need to focus them. So we're going to start out Alkani Crypts in like the B tier. It's not too difficult, but if you don't know what's in there, it might kill you immediately. Alright, we're going to move out from Alkandune and just check out some of the other dungeons. We've got Old Hills, Brad Foothills. Now this dungeon can be difficult, especially the end. Old Hills, Brad Foothills, or OHB, you've got the first boss. hits the tank very hard. So you're going to want to make sure that you've got some type of damage reduction or like a curse of weakness from a warlock. But that first boss can hurt really bad. And I would say other than that, the last boss where you have the horde mode of the dragons coming through, that has to be completely coordinated. So I'm going to put this in S tier because the mechanics that you have and some of the DPS checks, you got to know what you're doing or you're going to wipe. And all your characters are going to go back to the leveling zones. Alright, what's up next? We've got Shadow Labs. Shadow Labs can also be a notoriously difficult dungeon, especially the last hallway where the mobs are flying out from either side and you got to make sure that you're doing those pulls very specifically. Also, the second boss in the dungeon has a group mind control event that you want to make sure you're using all of your big cooldowns before you start the boss fight. I'm going to put Shadow Labs in A tier. I don't think the bosses are as hard as some of the other ones or the mobs, but it's still a little bit harder than Alkanai Crypts for sure, especially that last hallway. Alright, let's see what we got next. Slave Pens. If anybody knows Burning Crusade, Slave Pens is an absolute cakewalk. This thing is a joke. There are some mobs that you'll need to know that they're going to tremor or they're going to fear, so you're going to need a tremor totem or some type of dispel. But other than that, the bosses are easy, the mobs are easy, they don't hit hard. Yeah, that's D tier. Very easy dungeon. Almost basically free badges of justice. Alright, let's go into Hellfire. Oh, Hellfire Peninsula, aka Hellfire Ramparts. Hellfire Ramparts. You know, these orc dungeons I always kind of rate a little bit higher because the orc NPCs just hit harder and they hit the most hard in comparison to the rest of the TBC content. So if you're a melee DPS and you accidentally pull threat on one of these orcs in Hellfire Peninsula in the dungeons, heroic dungeons, you're gonna die. However, Ramparts is one of the easier ones and it doesn't require as much coordination as the other Hellfire dungeons, so I'm going to put Hellfire Ramparts maybe I'm going to put a low B tier, maybe high C. The orcs hurt, but they don't like randomly attack you, and the second boss can be a little tricky if you're a melee comp where it applies a debuff that you have to get out of the way of other people or you're going to kill your teammates. Alright, I'm going to just... Magister's Terrace is in here. It's not available and we weren't able to test it, but it is notoriously a difficult dungeon. We're just going to put that in Mega S tier for now. Let's go to one of the Netherstorm dungeons, Mechanar. Okay, Mechanar can be kind of difficult as a melee DPS, especially on that second boss. You got to really watch out for the fire elementals as they pulsate Hellfire Novas, and you can get dazed by them, so you want to make sure that you're moving around that room properly so you're not getting caught. Other than that, it's like the second and third boss require a little bit coordination, so I would say it's definitely more difficult than Alkanai Crypts, but not nearly as difficult as Shadow Labs. We're going to put this in high B tier. There are certain mobs that can hurt as well. There's particularly these packs of 4 mobs that throw arcane grenades, and you have to make sure you're not taking too much damage from them. But aside from that, there's not a ton of like CC coordination that needs to be going on during this dungeon. Back over to Zangarmarsh, we have Steam Vaults, or the Steam Vault. This dungeon I found to be really easy. There are Tremor Totem ads. You want to just make sure that there are certain ads that can fear. You want to drop that Tremor, get a Dispel in there. The bosses are also really easy with the Bloodlust. You might have some DPS checks, but this one is, almost as easy as Slave Pens, but can be a little bit harder because some of the ads do hit harder, or some of the mobs do. So we're going to put that at C tier. To round out Zangarmarsh, we have the Underbog. Underbog, I thought was going to be easier than Steam Vault, but actually Underbog I found to be much harder than Steam Vault. One, because of the manta rays that are in there, or the fen rays as they call them. They have a terror that is a fear where it actually increases your movement speed. So Tremor Totem isn't actually able to capture this. You have to make sure you're either kicking really fast or you have a quick dispel on your priest or healing class. The bosses are pretty easy. If you've got good DPS, there's not really any major mechanics that you need to do. Aside from just making sure that you're avoiding damage, like from standing in fire, things like that. But there is this last hallway before the third boss where those fen rays do fear, and you can accidentally pull mobs. It probably wipe your whole group or just yourself. So we're going to put that above Steam Vault in difficulty. Alright, next up we got the Black Morass. This one was a joke. I will say that. Black Morass, very easy. The mobs do hit harder than Underbog, though, so I'm not going to say Black Morass is easier than the Zangarmarsh dungeons. Zangarmarsh dungeons are the easiest. Familiarize yourselves with those dungeons, because those are going to be really easy ways when we don't have a lot of great gear on hardcore, especially if you're self-found, to get those badges of justice early and get some heroic gear early. Black Morass is that next step up where the Dragon Horde mode, you don't have a lot of time to drink or anything like that, except between bosses. But with Bloodlust and, you know, a couple of handy-dandy totems in the Dragon Pulls, you just have to make sure you're watching out for ads that cleave, and there is some spell damage that comes out, but I usually grounding totem that. So I'm going to put that out as a C tier dungeon. We pretty much never group wiped in this dungeon. It was really easy. Alright, let's get into some of the more difficult dungeons. Mana Tombs. I'm going to put this Mana Tombs, it's going to be high A tier. Well, not as high as Shadow Lapse. We're going to put it possibly mid or low A tier. Mana Tombs has some difficult bosses where if you don't know the mechanics of the boss, you are going to wipe the group. Particularly the first boss. The first boss has a reflecting ability that if you continue to attack the boss, you will start dealing a bunch of damage to the rest of your group and you will kill everybody. So it's really important. First and last boss, you want to make sure you're doing those right. But the packs that you're pulling throughout the dungeon aren't too scary for your tank to manage with a little bit of CC. To round out Outkendown or Terracar Forest, we have Sethic Halls. Now, Sethic Halls I thought was going to be easier than Mana Tombs, but after we ran it a couple times, I'm actually going to put it just higher than Mana Tombs, but a little bit lower than Shadow Labs. Shadow Labs does have that really hard hallway at the end, where you got to make sure you're pulling your packs right. Whereas Sethic Halls, each pull is very specific in terms of its crowd control, and this dungeon will be very hard if you do not have a priest. There are undead casting mobs that the priest can shackle, and then you usually have like a sap or a polymorph on another ad, and you're able to DPS down these packs with relative ease. But if you screw up your CC, these ads hurt a lot. There are ads that do large thunderclaps. The ads that are casters do lots of damage. So being really on point with your CC in Sethic Halls is going to be really important. The bosses in there aren't super hard, but the last boss in Sethic Halls does do a lot of damage. You want to make sure you're avoiding mechanics with the pillar as appropriate. Alright, next up we've got Arcatraz. Arcatraz, I will argue, is the hardest heroic dungeon for hardcore in TBC for a couple of reasons. One, the bosses have DPS checks where you're going to want to make sure that you have the most amount of like heroic blue gear, if not maybe a couple badge of justice gear possible before you step into this dungeon. You have some DPS checks that are difficult. You also want to make sure that you're bringing shadow protection potions for the first boss and the last boss, because they deal a ton of shadow damage, and especially as melee DPS, you soak that mechanic like once or twice and you're going down. In addition to that, you have to be very coordinated with your pulls in every single room. There are patrolling mobs with differing, the aggro radius of certain mobs is a lot larger, like the big Voidwalker room. In addition to that, you also have the demon room, which we like to call bobbing for demons. There are invisible succubi that patrol this room before the third... is it the third boss? That's like the second and third boss. Where if you accidentally pull one of the big like melee cleaving demons, like Felguard, with one of the succubi, your tank will die. Your tank can only take one of those demons at a time. There is a reset spot, so there is a way to kind of cheese it a little bit, where if you accidentally pull 2 demons, you can all jump up onto the reset spot and reset the demons. But having a hunter, or you have to have some type of AoE like Mass Dispel or Blizzard to help bring the succubi out of hiding one at a time, or else your tank's going to die and you're all going to wipe. So, Arcatraz, very difficult dungeon. Next up, Shattered Halls. Shattered Halls I was close to putting as the highest S tier dungeon, but I'm actually going to drop it below Arcatraz. Shattered Halls has some really hard-hitting orcs. You have a lot of specific crowd control, coordinated pulls. You have to make sure you're pulling mobs back, because certain orcs do a call for help, which then calls all the other orcs for help, and you'll pull additional packs even though you didn't mean to. The bosses you have to have coordinated strategies for. The first one's kind of a tank and spank, but the second boss and the third boss you definitely need to have a strategy for, in terms of making sure that your DPS aren't taking too much damage during those fights, because you can die very quickly. You do need like fire protection potions, you need iron shield potions. There's a lot going on in this dungeon, so make sure you do your research before you step into Shattered Halls, and that you have a group that you can trust. Oh, Botanica. Our other Netherstorm dungeon. I'm actually going to put Botanica a little bit below Mechanar in the mid B tier section. This dungeon can be trivialized by Shadow Priests, but for our average groups that don't have mind control, maybe they didn't bring a priest, they brought a different healer. Botanica can be a little bit difficult because there are specific ads that do a lot of AoE ground effect damage that is very difficult to see in terms of its particle effects, and you only have about like a second to a second and a half to jump out of that ground AoE, or as a DPS you're going to die. This can be made a little bit easier, like I was saying, with the Shadow Priest, because they can take control of the ads and use those abilities on the other ads in the dungeon. However, as long as you focus the ads that do these specific abilities, this dungeon is also very easy. We actually did a challenge mode in Botanica on one of the boss pulls. The bosses are an absolute joke, but the ads are what make this dungeon specifically difficult. So I'm going to put this in the mid B tier. And last, but certainly not least, Blood Furnace. Blood Furnace, I'm going to be putting in high S tier above Shattered Halls. And let me tell you why. Blood Furnace, as you may have seen from a couple of the clips throughout the the hardcore videos that I made, is the neophyte orcs in Blood Furnace have a charging ability and also an enrage, where if they're enraged and they charge a player, they have a chance, kind of like Gruul, where they will just randomly turn and attack the person that is within melee that is second on threat aside from the tank. And it only took me dying once to one of them. I got hit for like 9k and then like a second hit for like 4k, but you are not surviving hits from these neophyte orcs. They are absolutely terrifying. I would highly recommend bringing some type of CC. In particular, the second the second boss fight, you have a gauntlet where you're fighting multiple fel orcs and multiple neophytes. You're going to need polys, you're going to need saps, you're going to need mind control, you're going to need magic dust even. Like I'm going to be farming magic dust just for this dungeon so that I can just magic dust one of the orcs and we can just focus down these orcs in the gauntlet one at a time. Aside from that, there is also a couple of demon pulls just before the last boss where those demons hit the tank really hard. You're able to kite the other demon, but you still have to really, like, the healer and the tank have to be very coordinated in anticipating damage, because the tank will be taking a ton of damage from those demons. So there you have it. There is our hardcore heroic dungeon Burning Crusade tier list. Feel free to take a look at it. Let me know what you guys think. I would be really curious to see what you have to say about the heroic dungeons in Burning Crusade and how difficult they will be on hardcore. Well, everyone, I hope you enjoyed watching me die multiple times during this TBC Hardcore Heroic Dungeon Scouting Report and tier list from the Melee DPS perspective. If you liked the video, please subscribe to the YouTube channel so I can create more, or you can find me on Twitch. Link will be in the description below. Can't wait to see you all in pre-patch and soon enough in Outland. We will be prepared! Peace!
You are not prepared!